Welcome to this next video on study skills. My name's Andy Wicks, and in this video I'm going to look at the plight of us poor teachers. We're so hard done by. At least that's what I'm going to try and convince you of, but don't believe me. Right, teachers cannot win. As we've discussed in previous videos, there are different ways of looking at things, and depending on how you look at something will determine who gets what you're teaching and who doesn't. Let me give you an example. The first class I ever taught, they were doing quite complicated mathematics. And I was a bit nervous, so I'd got all my notes, and I knew that at the end I should get to 52 take away 27, and I got to 52 take away 27. I was so relieved. Everything had worked out, and so I did 52 take away 27, and then there was uproar. Half the class said, "You've done that wrong," and the other half said, "No, he's done it right." 52 take away 27 is not a very complicated bit of maths. It's the sort of thing that you would do at primary school. So why did it cause so much confusion? Well, if you imagine the sum, 52 take away 27, you'd write 5 2 at the top, 2 7 at the bottom, and you'd want to take the 7 from the 2. But you can't, because 7 is bigger than 2. So what do? You put a 1 by the 2 to make it 12. And everybody was in agreement so far. And then where do you get that 1 from? Well, the way I was taught is that if I'm adding a 10 to the top, I've got to add a 10 to the bottom. So I'd make that bottom 2 a 3. Now I'm taking 3 from 5, and that works. Other people, and this is the common system nowadays, would take the 1 from the 5 at the top, making that 4, and would then take the 2 from the 4. In either case you end up with 25. The sum still works regardless of which direction you work it in. But if I do it one way, I lose half the class. If I do it the other way, I lose the other half of the class. And when I came to ask, there were 10 different ways in that class about how to take away 27 from 52. So I can lose my students, not because my students are no good, not because I'm a lousy teacher, but I'm doing it in one way and they're trying to make sense of that in a different way. That's not their fault, that's not mine. We've also discussed the zone of proximal development. What is within this zone, near the ball of what you know, is different for different people. Your educational experiences will be different from the person who's sitting next to you in class, even if they went to the same school, because they've picked up on some things and they've heard things from parents or friends or seen it on the telly, and you didn't. And so everybody's educational experience is different. And that leads me to the Dunning-Kruger effect. This has popularly been known as something that sorts silly people from clever ones, but that's not the case. Let me tell you a story. There was a bank robber in the States who thought that it would be a good idea to go in and rob a bank, because that was his trade. And he'd heard from a friend that you could write notes by using lemon juice. If you use lemon juice to write, the writing on the paper is invisible. And it's only when you put that paper over a heat source, a light bulb or a candle or something, that you can actually see the writing. So he thought, if it makes the writing invisible, surely it must make me invisible. So he put lemon juice on his face, and he thought he'll do an experiment. What he did was he took his camera and took a selfie. Unfortunately, his aim was bad, and all he did was shoot over his shoulder. So what he got was the ceiling of his flat, and he assumed that he was invisible. He went down the bank, robbed it, went to the next bank down the street, robbed it, despite the video cameras in the banks. And when he got home, lo and behold, there were the astonished police, killing themselves laughing when he told them this story. Now, Dunning-Kruger thought that this was quite an interesting thing, because it's the sort of thing that happens in education. We set you a piece of work. You see the piece of work in terms of what you know. So if you think that what's being asked is this big, then you'll see a smaller problem than somebody who thinks it's this big. Same piece of work, but different perspectives, different ways of looking at it. The one who thinks it's this big thinks, I've only done 60–70% of that, so I'm going to get 60–70% of the marks. The other one sees it as this big, and they think they've done it all, they've done it brilliantly, and then they fail, because they haven't seen how big the problem really is. By the way, the ones who thought they'd got 60 or 70 have probably got 80–90. So these people are at a disadvantage. The ones who think that the subject is smaller are at a disadvantage over those who think the subject is bigger. And that depends, believe it or not, and I know this is going to sound like teacher talk, on attendance, work, paying attention. Those who do more of those three will see the subject as bigger. They will underestimate what they have done relative to the problem, and so they will actually think that their grades are lower when they're higher. Now that brings me on to a different problem. There is a wonderful video, to which I'm going to give the link below here, about a problem that occurs a lot in education. I go into a lecture theatre, I teach something, and I know I've taught it because it's there, it's on the video of the lecture. But you haven't seen it. Not because you're silly, not because you're no good, not because you were chatting to your mate, although you may have been, but because you were concentrating on an earlier problem and you missed this bit of knowledge that happened whilst you were thinking. And that is a major issue in education. And take that with the Dunning-Kruger effect and you get confused students. If you feel that you're not performing at your level, it may be down to a combination of one or both of these. Now there's a further problem, and that's one of motivation. There's deep and surface learning. Surface learners are those who want to pass. What do I need to do to get 40% if 40% is the pass mark? They're not interested in what all the other stuff is. Just get me through. And if I get 45, that's a result. On the other hand, you're going to get those who would be doing the course even if it wasn't something that gave them a qualification. They're interested in what they can do in this area. They're genuinely interested, and they're deep learners. They're the ones who will actually go into it. And what you get are surface learners thinking the coursework is this big, and the deep learners thinking it's that big. If you're interested in what you do, you'll do more reading around, more looking at videos on YouTube. YouTube is excellent, of course, for educational videos, and so on. So we then come to the problem of what you can do in class. The obvious is to ask questions. Now, it may mean me going over something I've already gone over. But if you were paying attention and you didn't get it, that's fine. That's my problem. I'm being paid to teach. I'm being paid a lot of money to teach. It's the Mars bar principle. If you don't understand, the problem is not you, it's me. And so you have to be able to interrupt and ask questions. Not for the sound of your own voice, not to interrupt whilst there's a flow of information going, but at a sensible point, making it clear that you'd like to ask something and asking for clarification of whichever point it was that was causing you concern. Because it's much easier to answer questions when it's close to your zone of proximal development, close to that ball of knowledge that you have, than it is 3 weeks further on when I've done a whole load of other stuff that depended on this bit that you haven't seen. And then there's a problem. I've got to go back over 3 weeks' work. So please do ask questions. If you don't understand, ask questions sensibly and politely, because if you're having a problem, so will somebody else, even if they don't realise it.